Shalom from the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, here in Jerusalem, capital of the state of Israel. I want to say a big shalom to my friend Reverend Charles Wang and everyone joining us from the Roots and Branches International Ministry in California and all around the world. I'm looking forward to sharing with you today some of the newest discoveries from the city of David that are bringing the Bible to life. I hope you enjoy. It's an honor, as always, to be here together with you here. And while we can't be together in person, I am still looking forward to sharing with you a special virtual tour of the city of David. For billions of people here, Jerusalem is a place of meaning, of inspiration, of faith. It's the place where the words of the Bible come to life. And yet, until recently, historically speaking, we had lost Jerusalem. When people thought, where is the Jerusalem of the Bible? Everyone was looking in the wrong place. So what we're going to do today is together explore the city of David. How is it lost? How is it rediscovered? And what are some of the incredible discoveries being unearthed here every single day that are showing that our shared connection to Jerusalem, going back thousands of years, is not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Let's get started. Up until 150 years ago, when people thought, where is the original biblical city of Jerusalem? The city of King David, King Solomon, King Hezekiah, prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, there was one answer. And that answer was the old city of Jerusalem, surrounded by those iconic old city walls. Now, the old city walls are old. They go back about 450 years. But Jerusalem is a city that goes back about 4,000 years, already dating back to the time of Abraham, which meant that until recently, everyone was looking for Jerusalem in the wrong place. Now, in 1867, Queen Victoria of England wants to discover the treasures of the Bible, such as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if you want to search for the treasures of the Bible in the Promised Land, you'll go to Jerusalem. And that's what she does. She sends a man by the name of Captain Charles Warren here to Jerusalem to find those treasures. And if you're going to search one place in Jerusalem to find the treasures of the Bible, you'll go to what's behind me over here, to the Temple Mount, the biblical Mount Moriah. This is the spot where the Bible tells us that the binding of Isaac takes place in the book of Genesis. This is the spot where King David's son Solomon will build the temple, hence the name Temple Mount. The Temple of Solomon would stand for over 4 centuries until being destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, rebuilt a few decades later, and then destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. All of that is happening on this spot over here on the Temple Mount. So Charles Warren says this is the spot to search for the treasures of the Bible. Except in 1867, the Ottomans are here. The Muslims are ruling this area, and they say, Charles, we're sure you are a great guy, but you're not going to dig up the Temple Mount. So now Charles Warren realizes that he has a problem. He can't go home to the Queen empty-handed. So he says, if I can't excavate on the Temple Mount, on the site of the biblical Mount Moriah, I'll do the next best thing, which is to excavate near it. So he comes down the slopes of Mount Moriah and he walks through the Kidron Valley to the east. And as he's walking through the valley, he comes across an ancient spring, a spring mentioned in the Bible known as the Gihon Spring. And he sees that this spring is flowing through an ancient man-made tunnel dating back thousands of years. And he's curious, where does this tunnel lead? So he begins to walk through this water tunnel, totally dark. He's carrying a torch. And at a certain point, as he's walking through the tunnel, the flame of the torch begins to flicker wildly. He looks above his head and he sees there's a shaft going up into the mountain. And again, he's curious, where does this shaft lead? So he climbs up the shaft and he comes out amidst a network of underground tunnels and fortifications with antiquities, that's a fancy word for old stuff, dating back thousands of years. So he comes up with a theory. Until that time, everyone believes that the original biblical city of Jerusalem, the city of David, is located inside the walls of the old city. Charles Warren says, I believe everyone's wrong. I believe that the original biblical city of Jerusalem, the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, is not located inside the walls of the old city, but is in fact located outside the walls of the old city. Now, when he announces this theory to the world, scholar and layman alike say, Charles, that is the most ridiculous thing we've ever heard. And for good reason, because if you looked at what this 11-acre ridge that I'm standing on right now, what it looked like at that time, there was nothing here. It was a barren ridge. And so they say, Charles, you're telling us that this barren 11-acre ridge, this is the Jerusalem of the Bible. This is the Jerusalem that has significance to billions of people around the world? It can't be. It has to be the old city of Jerusalem. Charles Warren insists, he says, I'm telling you, this is the place. And over the next 150 years, where I'm standing right now, here in the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, this will become one of the most archaeologically excavated sites in the world. And it becomes clear that Charles Warren was in fact correct, that the original biblical location of Jerusalem, the city of David, is located just outside the walls of the old city, south of the Temple Mount. Now, when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. And when you look in the Bible, there's also a clue to tell us where Jerusalem is located. If you open to the book of Psalms, of course attributed to none other than King David himself, it says, Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains, like God surrounds his people forever. Now, why 3,000 years ago would King David have chosen that description for Jerusalem? So if we imagine that King David is more or less in this area 3,000 years ago, and he looks out his window to the north, he sees the biblical Mount Moriah. He looks out his window to the east, he sees the Mount of Olives. He looks to the south, he sees the ridge of Armon HaNetziv. He looks to the west, he sees Mount Zion. Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. Now you might say, well, what's the big deal? It's obvious. Up until 150 years ago, where does everyone think that the original biblical city of Jerusalem is? Inside the walls of the old city. If you're standing inside the old city walls, then those same words, Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains, it's like poetry. Sounds beautiful, but doesn't mean a whole lot, because when you're standing in the old city, Jerusalem is not surrounded by mountains. It's only over the last century plus of archaeological excavations taking place here in the city of David that the words of King David, that the words of the Bible come to life. Why does King David write that Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains? Because it is. When you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. Now let's go see some archaeology. In 2005, where I'm standing right now is underground. Our visitor center was directly above my head. One morning, a woman by the name of Dr. Eilat Mazar, a world-renowned archaeologist, comes into our offices and says, you need to move your visitor center. We ask her why. She says, beneath your feet, you will find the palace of King David. Now, it's one of those awkward moments. What do you say to that? So we said, Dr. Mazar, people have been digging in the city of David for nearly the last 150 years. No one's ever said that before. What makes you so certain that this is the place? So she says, first, very simply, the city of David is a city on a hill. And if you have a city on a hill, where will you expect to find the palace? At the top of the hill. Where I'm standing right now is the top of the city of David. She argued this is where you'll find King David's palace. So he said, Dr. Mazar, perhaps 3,000 years ago, during the time of David, perhaps people built their palaces in the middle of the city. Maybe they built them at the bottom of the city. We are not going to move our visitor center simply because were you to be queen today, you would build your palace right here. What else do you have to support your theory? So Dr. Mazar shows us a discovery found here some 60 years ago on the slope that I'm standing atop right now, a royal Phoenician capital. Phoenicia is modern-day Lebanon, and a capital is a special stone that would have stood atop an ancient column or pillar in an important building. And Dr. Mazar said that this royal Phoenician capital proves that where we're standing right now is in fact the location of King David's palace. So he said, Dr. Mazar, what does a royal Phoenician capital have to do with David and where he built his palace? Maybe it teaches us something about the ancient Phoenicians, but that's about it. So she says to us, if you knew the Bible like I know the Bible, You wouldn't ask questions like that. So he said, well, clearly we don't. Please enlighten us. And she said, if you open up to the second book of Samuel, chapter 5, verse 11, King David has somehow managed to do the impossible. He has managed to conquer a city that the Bible tells us in the book of Joshua, in the book of Judges, in the book of Samuel, no one can conquer this hilltop until King David comes along. Exactly how David conquers this hilltop, how he makes Jerusalem the capital of Israel for these last 3,000 years, well, for that, you're going to have to come on an actual tour of the city of David. But Dr. Mazar says that if you continue in the story after King David conquers Jerusalem and makes Jerusalem his capital, what does it say next? That King David reached out to his neighbors in the north, the Phoenicians. And it says, King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David with cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. So Dr. Mazar says, why do we find a royal Phoenician capital here in the city of David? Because it was the Phoenicians who built David's palace. So he said, well, that's pretty compelling. So what happens next? Dr. Mazar from the Hebrew University, together with the Israel Antiquities Authority, the body that oversees all archaeological excavation in the country, they come and they begin to dig. And they find to the north, to the east, walls more than 20 feet thick, far thicker than the walls of the White House. And they realize that a massive structure would have been standing here thousands of years ago. But the question is, to what time period? Who was living here? Dr. Mazar finds at the base of the walls pottery, which she dates back, along with other organic material, to 3,000 years ago, to the time of King David. And she comes up with a theory that, based on the archaeological evidence, based on the Bible together, we are standing in the place where King David's palace once stood. She announces this theory, and scholars and archaeologists come and say, Dr. Mazar, show us the evidence, which she does. And some agree with her and say, yes, this could very well be King David's palace. Others say, Dr. Mazar, what you date to the time of David, we date to 100 years after David. So what's the debate surrounding where we're standing right now? It's not so much what this area was. There is near consensus that where I am standing right now was the royal government center of the Davidic dynasty, the original Capitol Hill, if you will. The question is more, was King David here or perhaps his grandson? Personally, it's not keeping me awake at night. The Davidic dynasty was ruling from here. Now, had you said to someone prior to 1993, I'm going to visit the city of David, there was a whole group of scholars known as the Copenhagen School. They would have said to you, the city of David, you mean King David from the Bible? You would have said, well, of course, who else? Well, you know, they would say, historically speaking, there was no such person. Until an excavation in Israel's north, in a place called Tel Dan, a large stone inscription is discovered, dating to some 150 years after King David would have lived. And it was written by a man named King Hazael of Aram, who he himself is mentioned in the Bible in the second book of Kings. And this King Hazael was in a good mood. Why? The inscription tells us that he had just won a major military victory. Over who? Over a king from the house of David. And if there's a house of David, what does that mean? That means that there was, of course, a David. Now, the Bible tells us that King David ruled from Jerusalem. Now, here's what I can tell you with absolute certainty. King David never walked through the old city of Jerusalem. King David never put a note between the stones of the western wall. How can I be so certain? Very simple. That dates to 1,000 years after David would have lived. If, as the Bible says, that King David ruled from Jerusalem, where was Jerusalem during the time of David? Right here, where I'm standing in the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began. And now I want to show you another discovery made by Dr. Mazar just a few feet away from where I'm standing right now that is perhaps even more incredible than the potential discovery of the palace of King David. Let's go take a look. In 2007 and 2008, Dr. Mazar is still digging here in the same excavation, and she makes a discovery that changes the way how many people relate both to the Bible and to where I am right now here in the city of David. Now today, when we send an email, a WhatsApp, or iMessage, we have encryption and encoding to ensure that the only people who will read that message are the intended recipients. But imagine 2,500 years ago, you're a government official and you need to send a secure message. You don't have encryption and encoding technology, and you don't have the ability to deliver the message yourself. So what technology can you use thousands of years ago to ensure that both as the sender and the recipient that you know that the messenger was faithful, that nobody read your message? So what you're going to do is you're going to write your message. Then you're going to roll it up and tie it up. But before you hand it to the messenger, you're going to take a small piece of clay and you're going to place it on the knot of the letter. And while the clay is soft, you're going to take your ring and stick it into the clay on your ring. And now on the clay seal impression is your name and then son or daughter of your father's name. Dr. Mazar is digging here a little more than a decade ago, and she finds two small clay seal impressions. And she says there are names on the impressions, and those names appear in the Bible. But before I tell you what the names are, I want to put it into a bit of historical context. And in order to do that, we have to go back 2,500 years ago to 586 before the Common Era. The Babylonians are going to destroy Jerusalem. If we go back 40 years prior to that, there is a young man. He's about 13, 14 years old. He's a prophet. His name is Jeremiah. Jeremiah is walking through the streets of the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, telling any who will listen, you've become corrupted. You're no longer treating the poor with mercy, widows and orphans with kindness. You've abandoned the teachings of God. If you don't repent, if you don't change your ways, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. But nobody wants to listen to Jeremiah. They mock him, they scorn him, they beat him up, they lock him up. Until years go by, decades go by. And one day the people wake up, they look outside the window and they see the entire city of Jerusalem surrounded by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar. And now Jeremiah, decades older, goes to the king, the last king of the Davidic dynasty, King Zedekiah, and he says to the king, it is too late to save Jerusalem. However, if you, King Zedekiah, tell the troops defending the capital to surrender, if you, King Zedekiah, tell the soldiers defending Jerusalem to lay down their arms and open the gates to the enemy, then you, King Zedekiah, and your family will live, and you'll go off into exile with the rest of the people of Jerusalem. But if you don't surrender, then you, King Zedekiah, you will die. And the last thing you'll see before being put to death will be your children murdered before your eyes. Now, what do you call a person like this Jeremiah, who threatens the king's family, calls for the surrender of Jerusalem, demoralizes the troops? One could call him a traitor. And that's how the ministers of the king related to Jeremiah. They said, this man is a traitor. Now, what do you do with traitors in ancient times? You kill him. So what advice do the ministers of the king have to do with this prophet Jeremiah? Well, if we open up to the book of Jeremiah, from the beginning of chapter 38, it tells us. It says, Shephatiah the son of Matan, Gedaliah the son of Pashhur, Juchal son of Shlemiah, and Pashhur son of Malchiah heard what Jeremiah was saying to all the people. Then the officials said to the king, let that man be put to death, for he disheartens the soldiers and all the people who are left in the city by speaking such things to them. That man does not seek the welfare of the people, but their harm. The king replied, he is in your hands. The king will not oppose you in anything. So what advice do they have for the king? To kill the prophet Jeremiah. Now, Dr. Mazar is digging here just a little more than a decade ago, and she finds two small clay seal impressions. And there are names on those impressions, written in ancient Hebrew writing. And the names, Dr. Mazar says, appear in the Bible. But not only do the names appear in the Bible, they appear in the same book of the Bible, the book of Jeremiah. Not only do they appear in the same book, they appear in the same chapter, Jeremiah 38. Not only do the seals that were found just where I'm sitting right now, not only do they appear in the same chapter, they appear in the same verse, Jeremiah 38, verse 1. Not only do the names on the seals appear in the same verse, they appear in that verse back to back, one name right after the other. What are the names on the seals? We have Gedaliah son of Pashhur and Yuchal son of Shlemiah, two of the four ministers of King Zedekiah who plotted to kill the prophet Jeremiah. Where were the seals found? In the area believed by archaeologists to have been the royal government center of the Davidic dynasty. Even more specifically, where were the seals found? In an ash layer with antiquities dating back to the period of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. So you have the right people at the right place at the right time, all in an excavation that just a few years ago was still underground. Now, what makes this even more significant? Today, you have people in the United Nations and elsewhere who are denying the Jewish and Christian connection to Jerusalem, passing resolutions saying that the Western Wall, the Temple Mount are exclusively Islamic, saying that there should be no archaeological excavations in a place like the city of David. Why? Why would they say that? Because they know that every day that we dig in the city of David, we uncover antiquities that show that our shared connection to Jerusalem is not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact, where you could literally open the Bible in one hand, look at the archaeology that's being discovered in the other, and see that they match. When you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. Now let's go see some more. We are right now at the southern end of the city of David. In 2004, all of this is underground. Above our heads was a road. You can see the rusting green metallic doors that back in 2004, those were garage doors. You would have had cars coming in and out of those doors. Today, there are some 30, 40 feet above our heads right now. So what happens here? In 2004, where we're standing right now, there was a sewage pipe, and the sewage pipe explodes. So the Jerusalem municipality has to send in construction crews to repair that sewage pipe. You have the bulldozers and dump trucks doing their work. But Jerusalem is not just another municipality, and the city of David is not just another part of Jerusalem. When a sewage pipe bursts here, you don't only send in construction crews, you also send in archaeologists. The archaeologists are supervising the work. They begin to hear scraping and scratching. It doesn't sound right. So they clear everyone out, and it turns out that in repairing the sewage pipe, they had inadvertently uncovered these ancient stone steps, 2,000 years old. And the archaeologists immediately said, there's only one other set of steps in Jerusalem that look just like the steps that I'm standing on right now, and those are the steps leading up to the southern ascent of the temple, these southern steps with deep significance to Christians and Jews alike. And they said, well, we know what those steps are. Those are the steps that led up to the temple 2,000 years ago, going back to the time of Jesus. What's the significance of the steps where I'm standing here at the southern end of the city of David, a half a mile apart? And they realized that they had discovered the steps leading down to the ancient pool of Siloam. Now, what is the pool of Siloam? Of course, it has deep significance in the Christian scriptures. The Bible tells us that 3 times a year, all of Israel would have to go up to the temple on the Temple Mount. We're talking about Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. And of course, before one can go up to the temple, you have to purify, wash, bathe, cleanse. The historian Josephus said 2,000 years ago that you would have had nearly 3 million people going on pilgrimage on those festivals. And that's a lot of people who have to purify themselves. The pool of Siloam, archaeologists believe, is the size of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Why so big? To accommodate the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pilgrims who would purify themselves before ascending up to the temple on the Temple Mount. This here is the beginning of the pool of Siloam. It extends to the south of where we're standing. God willing, one day in the future, we'll be able to excavate the rest of the pool. And the archaeologists understood, if this is the pool of Siloam, and they knew where the temple stood on the Temple Mount, some half-mile north from here, how did all those hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pilgrims, get from the pool all the way up to the temple thousands of years ago? So they widened the excavation, and they made a discovery that is changing Jerusalem forever. And I'm looking forward to sharing this excavation, not yet open to the public, with you right now. Welcome to what is perhaps the most significant archaeological excavation taking place anywhere in the world. This active excavation, not open to the public, here in the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began, is changing Jerusalem forever. I am standing now on the pilgrimage road. This is the road that my ancestors and yours 2,000 years ago would have walked on when they ascended from the Pool of Siloam, where we just came from, purifying themselves before beginning the half-mile journey up to the temple on the Temple Mount, the biblical Mount Moriah. Not a road near here, not stones that look like these, but this road and these actual stones. This is the pilgrimage road, the biblical superhighway. Now, what archaeologists are doing is excavating a north-south connection from the Pool of Siloam going up towards the Temple Mount, the western wall, the southern steps. God willing, when that excavation is completed in the next few years, they will then do an east-west expansion of the pilgrimage road. As archaeologists excavate the length of the pilgrimage road, they discover homes and shops lining the ancient road. Imagine thousands of years ago, someone on their way up to the temple needs to purchase something for a temple offering. Perhaps they need to get a hat or a bottle of water. They would have stopped at one of these shops along the road, made their purchase, and continued either down to the pool behind me or up towards the temple. This was the beating heart of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Now, in ancient times, this road would have been under the sky, outdoors. Today, we are 60 feet beneath the surface. The modern neighborhood of the city of David is 60 feet above my head right now, with the cars and buses and homes and shops, and 60 feet below is the pilgrimage road. One of the challenges when you come to Jerusalem, when you come to the city of David, is how do you preserve the modern city while uncovering the ancient? And that's what we're doing in this excavation here. All these arches are supporting the modern, allowing us to uncover an archaeological treasure that has significance to billions of people around the world. Now, in the Bible, some of the most famous chapters in the book of Psalms are known as the Songs of Ascent. Traditionally, those chapters are understood to be a description of the spiritual experience going to Jerusalem, going up to the temple atop the Temple Mount, to the holiest place in the world. However, perhaps there is also a more literal, physical description of those same words, those songs of ascent. Now, we are literally walking up along the pilgrimage road, along that half-mile journey from the Pool of Siloam to the temple on the Temple Mount. As one is going up to the temple, that is the time when they were saying those chapters of the Psalms, those songs of ascent. Those songs of ascent are the actual physical description of the pilgrimage experience going up to the temple thousands of years ago. Because when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. And now I'm going to share with you something incredible, the only one of its kind found along the pilgrimage road. I'm sitting here on a unique discovery, the only one of its kind found so far in Jerusalem, and it's found right here along the pilgrimage road. You can see it is a 3-level platform of some kind, and archaeologists determined that this is an ancient podium. Imagine 2,000 years ago, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people going down towards the Pool of Siloam to immerse and purify themselves, then coming up along the pilgrimage road all the way up to the footsteps of the temple on the Temple Mount. Now imagine there's someone who has a religious message, a political message, an ethical message they want to preach to the masses. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to where the people are. The people are here in the city of David along the pilgrimage road. So you could imagine the likes of whom would have stood up here delivering a message 2,000 years ago to the masses along the pilgrimage road, along the biblical superhighway here in Jerusalem. Now, when one thinks of the great wonders of the world, you may think of the pyramids in Egypt, you may think of the Colosseum in Rome. Not only do I believe that the pilgrimage road here in the city of David belongs in the same category as those great wonders of the world, but perhaps it belongs in a category all its own. And I'll tell you why. When one goes to visit the pyramids in Egypt, they could say, wow, look at the amazing architectural feats from nearly 4,000 years ago. But where is that Egypt civilization today? The answer is in history books, museums. One goes to Rome to see the Colosseum built by the great Roman Empire. But where is that great Roman Empire today? Also, museums, history books. One comes to Jerusalem. One comes to the city of David, the place where Jerusalem began. One walks along the pilgrimage road, and it's something entirely different. It's not once upon a time there was a place called Jerusalem. There were people called Jews. There were people called Christians. They had their strange beliefs. They believed in a book called the Bible, which no one even knows what it was anymore. That's not the case at all, because there is a Jerusalem still today, and it's the same Jerusalem from thousands of years ago. The people who walked this road thousands of years ago are going to be the same people who walk it in a few years' time, worshiping the same God, believing in the same customs and festivals and traditions, speaking the same language. It's all the same. This is not a piece of history. This is a continuation of a story. And where do you find that today? The answer is there are not many other places in the world where you will find something like the pilgrimage road being literally unearthed and excavated as we speak. This is the continuation of our shared story, our shared biblical heritage here in Jerusalem. And as we come to the end of our tour, I want to share one last story of a discovery made along the pilgrimage road. Now, in the year 70, the Romans would destroy Jerusalem. They would destroy the temple atop the Temple Mount. And they were so proud of their victory over Jerusalem that in the year 71, they minted a series of coins. And on one side of the coin, you had the Roman Emperor Vespasian. On the other side of the coin, you had a Roman legionnaire towering above a Jewish woman on her knees who was crying. And on the coin it said, Judea Capta. Judea had been captured or defeated. The name of the country at that time was Judea. Its capital was Jerusalem. Jews are called Jews because we come from Judea. Yehudim come from Yehudah. This was the most widely minted victory coin ever minted by the Romans, as if to say their victory over Judea and Jerusalem meant more to them than all their other victories. If one's been to Rome, not far from the Colosseum, you can see the Arch of Titus. Now, this arch was built in honor of Titus, who would later become Emperor of Rome. But before he becomes Emperor of Rome, he's the commander of the 10th Roman Legion, which destroys Jerusalem. On the arch, you could see the temple treasures, like the menorah, being led out of Jerusalem and into Rome. Again, you could see how proud the Romans were over their victory of Jerusalem and the Jewish people. And yet, during the period leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, from 66 to 70, there was a period known as the Great Revolt, the Great Jewish Revolt for freedom against the Roman occupation. And each year of the revolt, the Jewish people would mint small bronze coins, similar to the one I have over here. And on these coins, in ancient Hebrew writing, it had the words L'Cherut Zion, for the freedom of Zion. Zion being another name for Jerusalem. Now, this coin dates back to the year 67. Now, many similar coins just like this one have been found along the length of the road during the excavation. And scholars have long wondered, why were the Jews minting these coins? Because they must have known at that time that the Romans would eventually destroy Jerusalem. And if they really thought they had a chance to fight and defeat the Romans, why waste the metal on a worthless currency? Why not use it to make weapons, to make swords, to make arrowheads and spears? So I want to share with you an answer that I heard to this question. And that answer is that the Jews of Jerusalem understood that at that time, yes, Jerusalem was likely going to fall, but they believed that one day in the future their descendants would return and find these coins and know what their ancestors lived and died for a free Jerusalem. Now, they probably thought it would take a few decades, maybe a century. They couldn't imagine it would be nearly 2,000 years before their descendants returned as sovereign to Jerusalem. But here we are in Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state of Israel. And today there is a free Jerusalem, which is why in 1958, when Israel mints its first national medallion, they mint something that is seemingly very strange at first. Because if you look closely, what they minted here was the Roman victory coin. Now, why would they do that with the Roman legionnaire towering above the Jewish woman? It says Judea Capta on it. It doesn't make sense until when you turn it over, you can now see the Roman legionnaire is gone. The Jewish woman is no longer on her knees crying, but standing tall, proudly holding a newborn child in her arms. Beside her is a man working the land, making the desert bloom, and on the coin it says, Israel Liberata. Israel has been liberated. Where is the great Roman Empire today? Gone. But the Jewish people and Jerusalem are still here, open to people of all faiths and backgrounds. And God willing, in the coming years, we will be able to open up this whole area from the Pool of Siloam, excavate the full length of the pilgrimage road, come out by the western wall, the southern steps, the footsteps of the Temple Mount, where people will literally be able to walk in the footsteps of their ancestors, in the footsteps of the Bible, showing that our shared connection to Jerusalem, the biblical heritage of Jerusalem going back thousands of years, is not simply a matter of faith, but a matter of fact. I'm looking forward to sharing the pilgrimage with all of you in the years to come. God willing, this year in Jerusalem. Until then, shalom, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully very soon.